Okay, good to have you back, Dr. Jud. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
And today we wanted to talk about productivity anxiety, sort of under the bigger umbrella of striving. We've talked about this before on a summit that we did together, but I like the concept of productivity anxiety in particular because one of the things that I see a lot in my life and in my practice is that folks are saying they don't have enough time to get everything done, even though they're more efficient than they've ever been. We can get things done more quickly than we've ever been able
hmm
to get done. And then the flip side of that is that when people have a moment of free time, they feel guilty and uneasy. And this feeling of like, I should be doing something right now. So
hmm
we're caught in this productivity anxiety. And that term actually, I first learned from Rupi Kaur, who's a poet, and she wrote this beautiful poem called Productivity Anxiety. She says, I have this productivity anxiety that everyone else is working harder than me, and I'm going to be left behind because I'm not working fast enough, long enough, and I'm wasting my time. So, she goes on to talk all about all the things that she's missing out on because of this productivity anxiety.
Yeah. Do you want to start with where it comes from?
Sure.
Well, what I hear even in that poem, but I think we can probably all map out for any of us that can relate to the poem is that, we have this carrot dangling in front of us, whatever that carrot is, whatever the getting ahead in life is, whether it's at work, whether it's, family, health, you name it. And so we can lump all of that under the carrot, or the proverbial reward that keeps getting dangled in front of our faces. And then, we have a good day and we're really productive, whatever that looks like. We get a bunch written if we're writing a paper or a book, or we get a project done, or we just really feel like things are singing. And if we trace that backwards, of course, I see the world through the lens of reinforcement learning. We can look at the behavior and how rewarding it is. And then we can see what might trigger that the next day. So the next day we get up and we remember, wow, we had a really productive day, felt great. There's a reward. And then we say, okay, do it again. you know, but we can't just like snap our fingers and suddenly be productive. I think we can find all the ways to maximize productivity and kind of get in the flow. But I think this is where the irony comes in, that the more we try to be productive, the more anxious we get about it. It's that performance, that performance anxiety, in terms of like, we get anxious because we feel like we need to perform, which is different than uh, feeling like we have to be anxious to perform well. It's just the anxiety of the anticipation of like trying to do something, which makes us not perform well. And then we get stuck in these vicious cycles. So that's the first piece that I would kind of highlight or throw out there maybe for conversation. Does that fit with what you see in terms of some of the drivers for this?
Yeah. I mean, I see productivity anxiety is driven both by that positive reinforcement of getting the praise or the follower or the project done or the more money or whatever it is, that getting your Instacart delivery quickly, right? Um, the positive reinforcement. But I also really think that there's another driving force of negative reinforcement, of
Mm,
experiential avoidance, and
mm,
that's the difficulty with downtime that people have, that sort of uneasiness, the guilt. And when that shows up for folks, or just even just discomfort with boredom, we go into drive and doing. And
mhm,
I think there's a behavioral component to it. There's also such a social cultural component to
mhm,
productivity, or even capitalism and our understanding of what is productivity, because I think that that's really changed sort of over time. What does it mean to be productive? Certainly a hunter gatherer or a farmer had a very different perception of productivity than we do now.
yes, reading, was it I think it was Hariri. Was it his book on called Sapiens? Is that
Mhm.
right? Or am I
Yeah.
mixing up the
Yeah.
authors?
Yeah, Harari, uh-huh.
Yeah, Harari. He was talking, if I remember correctly, he wrote about how, hunter gatherers actually had a pretty darn good life because they weren't working 16 hours a day. They hunted, they gathered, and they rested. And we've kind of gotten ourselves in modern day. We think that just because things are modern, that therefore we must have made progress. But he's makes this argument that we need to rethink that. It's just because we're working long hours, working hard, doesn't mean that we're living better lives. And in fact, we're often, literally working ourselves to exhaustion. So I agree with that. That makes a lot of sense that if we don't step back and ask ourselves, what am I doing? And what's driving me to do this? We could just get stuck in this, the proverbial hedonic treadmill for our entire lives.
And what's our definition of productivity, I think, is a
Mhm.
big part of it. Basically, this sort of like fixation on hitting targets and what are the targets that we're trying to hit.
So what would you say you see as one of the big, where do people get stuck in circles these days with that productivity? Where do we get sucked in?
I think is a lot of different things. I think one, people not feeling satisfied when they've actually accomplished something
Mhm.
that's worth feeling satisfied about.
Mhm.
The sort of moving finish line that can happen for folks. As soon as you get there, you don't actually experience the goodness of getting there. You just move it out in front of you.
Mhm.
I think another thing is the never ending task lists that people have
Mhm.
and the real difficulty with being able to sort of the concept of rocks in a jar. Like you can only fit so many rocks in a jar. Our time is limited, but people are trying to squeeze so much into their day and then feel guilty that they're not fitting enough in and not able to recognize that we have to make choices around what rocks we're going to put in the jar, what are the most important ones, and that you will never be able to fit everything in. And that we need some space between the rocks as
Mhm.
well. Like just
Mhm.
jamming everything in leads to dissatisfaction. So
Mhm.
I would say those two things. Number one would be not feeling a sense of completion or competency or mastery as you are doing things in your life. And then number two is always feeling like you're never doing enough. There's
Mhm.
always more coming down, sort of the Lucille Ball chocolate. So many chocolates coming at you, and you're like stuffing them in your mouth and in your pockets to get through the day.
Yes. Well, it reminds me of this quote. Somebody asked John D. Rockefeller, I think at the time he was if not one of the richest people in the world. And they said, how much is enough? And he said, just a little bit more.
Yeah.
So it's like that's what that image of the rocks makes me
Hmm.
think of. He couldn't possibly be happier by getting more money. And in fact, you could argue that he was less happy by trying to get more money, because his money quotient, for happiness was saturated at that point. He didn't need more, but
Hmm.
that's that drive, just a little bit more if we're not paying attention. And then even looking at, do I want these rocks in my jar in the first place? So like you're pointing out, the space between the rocks might actually be as valuable or even more valuable than just collecting more rocks. It's I wonder what you think. This made me think of this, where we often get stuck going after the destination. It's like check all the things off of my list and then I'll be happy, as compared to looking at the journey itself, where, I'm probably stretching the metaphor a little bit far, but looking to see how rewarding or valuable the or accomplished we feel in the moment that we're in the journey. That's that space between the rocks, as compared to just trying to get more rocks.
Yeah. I have a confession to make around that
Okay.
where I was at this retreat. I think I told you that I wasn't going on it, but I ended up being able to go on this
Hmm.
amazing retreat to Costa Rica. And there were all these versions of rocks in the
Hmm.
jar, people there.
Hmm.
So super um, well-known people in the wellness world. Let's just
Okay.
say that. I won't disclose any names, but a lot of them were there. And I showed up and I had this feeling of craving to put rocks in my jar in the sense of I
Hmm.
want to go talk to this person and I want to go learn from this person. And I got so anxious while I was there of trying to seek out what my version for me, these are my versions of rocks in my jar, right? That I
Hmm.
actually missed out on opportunities to just be in this experience, right?
Hmm.
And one of the things that happened for me is I sat down with Stefan Reichshaven, who
Hmm.
founded the Retreat Center, and he wrote this book called Time Shifting, which is all about how to slow down and be in your life, basically. And he gave me this advice, which was basically stop trying so hard. Just be here, Diana. Like,
Hmm.
enjoy being here. Be on retreat with amazing people rather than trying to capture them.
Hmm.
And I think that we all have that, we can get hooked by that. And I know that's my version of that. For somebody else, it's something like money, or it's a body shape that they're trying to achieve, or it's followers in some, Twitter or Instagram. We can all get hooked. And I think the question is that really like what it feels like when we're in that cycle of striving or
Hmm.
productivity anxiety or whatever it is driving it? Is it really satisfying? It feels so hungry
Hmm.
and so ungrounded
Hmm.
to be there.
Hungry, hungry.
Mhm.
Yeah, it reminds me of the image of the hungry ghost in Buddhism, where there's this ghost with a long, long, narrow esophagus and a huge stomach. And so we can picture that, if this ghost is hungry, it tries to eat and tries to eat and tries to eat and tries to fill its stomach. But because of its anatomy, it can never do it. It's never full. That hungry ghost. So it's like, boy, if that doesn't lead to productivity anxiety, I don't know what does. Just wanting and wanting and wanting more.
Mhm. What about for you?
Hmm. Well, certainly, I'm just feeling into my experience around just the, you know, being, you know, doing things, like working, for example,
Mhm.
writing something, and how not only does it feel good, you think of the journey, but also the aim is to have something that's helpful for the world. Otherwise, I'm wasting my time. And so I can look at that as the destination. And if I get focused on, boy, this has to be good, I'm, let's say writing a book, and I hope people get it. And I hope this helps the world. And I hope, I don't get some goofball Amazon review or whatever, whatever my metric is for success. If I focus there, I can't write very well.
Mhm.
And it doesn't feel very good at all. Like you're saying, it's hungry. And that hunger gets in the way of the satisfaction of the process of eating itself, if we think of writing as eating.
Mhm. Yeah, I remember in your Unwinding Anxiety book how you write about the Amazon review that kind of sparked you to write this book, you know?
Yeah.
And I've wondered about that for you. I was like, is that productivity anxiety that he's trying to, overwrite something that was really painful for you? Or is that really just like values based of, I want to write a book that is helpful for
Mhm.
people in a different way than, the Craving Mind, it was amazing and beautiful. And Unwinding Anxiety is like the roadmap of how to do it. Right. So,
Mhm.
um, yeah, and maybe it's a little bit of both
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if I'm honest with myself, there are probably a number of components. Certainly, it's an ego blow
Yeah.
where, I wrote The Craving Mind, and I was thinking, yeah, here's here's the map and here's the compass, and people can navigate the territory themselves. And then, Amazon Addict was like, yeah, I've taken neuroscience courses. This book, he said something like, oh, he seems like he wants to help people, but he's not providing, basically the cookbook. And so, my ego's like, but you are the cookbook. And, and then there's a piece in there that says, yeah, she's got a really good point. And I know it's a she because I kind of tried to stalk her on Amazon. I write about this at the end of the book. I try to stalk her a little bit to try to like, who is this person? Telling a neuroscientist that they're not doing, the right thing with neuroscience or whatever. And so when I could let that ego piece go, it was a really great fire that she lit under my butt to say, yeah, you've got a really good point here. I do need to make something a little more pragmatic, write something a little more pragmatic. And I wasn't ready to write that book back when I wrote The Craving Mind, but I don't know, for 3-4 years later, whenever I wrote Unwinding Anxiety. And it just, the conditions had to come together for that. And I needed to get out of my own way. If I just sat there and shook my fist and said, you don't understand me. The Craving Mind is the best book I've ever written. I'll never write another one. And instead saying, that could help light a fire under my butt to write another book.
Yeah, and that feels much more values-based to me of like that's the doing, that's being in the journey, but then also seeing where you're going because it's something that's important to you as opposed to just going at it because you're hungry for more and it's
Mm-hmm.
not really connected to something
Hmm.
that is intrinsically motivating, important, of value to you personally, and also, of service to the world. So it feels different when you're in that kind of drive. It's a different kind of drive.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'm curious what you think about where ego fits within the values-based system. To me,
Mhm.
it's not. It's not part of values. It's just focusing on self.
Yeah. Yeah, Joseph Sorochi, he's like a major ACT guy that I love. He's a lot of research in the arena of ACT, and he did a talk on ego at the ACBS WorldCon last year and attachment. And one of the things that he said is, or he has sort of described it is in ACT, there's a process called self as content
Hmm.
versus self as context. So when you're
Hmm.
caught up in self as content, you are caught up in the I am. So
Mhm.
like, I am a neuroscientist and therefore you cannot challenge my book,
Right.
right? Or I am a wellness person and therefore you have to like me because you're a wellness person too, or whatever it is,
Yeah. Yeah.
or I am. And then self as context recognizes that we're much more contextual, like sometimes
Mhm.
I show up as my wellness person self, but not last night when I was like, not, had poor hygiene before bed and it was on my phone, so that we're much more contextual beings than that sort of ego self. And what Joseph Sorochi talks about is sort of that when we're in that selfing, that ego selfing, we use self as either a prize, like to hold ourselves up as better than, or that positive reinforcement, or we use the self as a shield to protect
Mhm.
ourselves. So the
Mhm.
negative reinforcement to protect ourselves from that feeling of vulnerability or insecurity or that not enoughness, which I think
Mhm.
also drives a lot of our productivity anxiety. If I'm not doing something or I'm not producing, then what is my worth? And that selfish shield can come in to kind of protect us from that.
Yeah, I 100% agree.